Hey guys, hope you're having a good week. Just wanted to let you know what we're talking about this week. You guys know that we spent our last 5 weeks talking about our relational God, so we're going to spend the next 5 weeks looking at our kind of taking on our epic fail portion of our epic fail series. And so we've spent 5 weeks on relational God to kind of set that foundation. And so the next 5 weeks is in light of our relational God. How do I fail with grace? Because it's not an if we mess up, really. It's a when we mess up. And too often, young people or all of us inadvertently are kind of taught in church that, as long as I do more good things than bad things, then I'm okay or I'm good to go. And that's not what makes faith stick. Having an understanding of a relational God is what makes our faith stick. It's not, rules aren't contagious. A relational and a loving God is 100%. And so we're going to walk into our epic fail series and start talking about what do I do when I mess up? How do I fail with grace? Or even if it's not my mistake, when crappy things happen, how do I get up from it in light of this idea that there's a God that wants to have a relationship with me, if that makes sense? And so this week we're going to be talking about the latter, because we're going to be talking about Joseph's story. And so there's going to be a few themes that we're going to track through his story, and that we'll be kind of tracking through several people's stories, not always identically, but you'll be able to kind of help, that the thread will help connect the weeks together. And so those themes will be pain and fear. Fear always being brought on by uncertainty, pain being brought on by one of a million things, as we know in our lives. And then we'll also look at how the presence of God in Joseph's life, even in the midst of terrible situations, always brings about freedom, and how God's unconditional love always brings confidence, a confidence that Joseph wouldn't have had on his own. And so in the very beginning, we'll start out talking about fears. And it'll start out a little bit silly. Kids will have the opportunity to tell about a time that they were afraid of something that they just weren't certain of. I'll start out telling a story of a time that I was afraid just because I was uncertain. And then that'll kind of kick off them already relating with this feeling of not liking it when they're uncertain about something, and then being able to walk in and that to open the door for us to be able to talk about how God's love for us, that's what brings confidence, and how his presence can bring freedom even in terrible situations. So walking through Joseph's story, I'll give you the scripture references. I apologize. They do jump around. It's because his story is really long, and we want to be able to give like the full spectrum of how the awesome things that God was able to do in Joseph's life. And so we'll start out in Genesis 37, 1 through 8. And that's just the very beginning of Joseph's life. It's, Dad likes him the most. He gets the coat. His brothers are jealous, and so they sell him into slavery to go into Egypt. And that kicks it off first. His pain's brought on by the fact that he's been abandoned. But the presence of God, really is what gets him through it. And we won't get into it too much then. But how his fear was just flat out brought on by the fact that he was uncertain about his future. He didn't know what was going to happen. And so anyway, we'll keep on going, and then the next chunk of the story is Joseph in Potiphar's house. And Joseph, of course, he starts working for Potiphar. He does a really awesome job, but then Potiphar's wife starts to like him and starts to hit on him and starts to come on to him. And Joseph, he knows it's wrong, so he doesn't do it. And Potiphar's wife accuses him of some things that he didn't do, and so Potiphar has Joseph locked up in jail. So now he's in jail again, and so now all of a sudden this pain is back. He was doing so well, the pain's back, and this fear is, that his fear is back, the uncertainty about his future, the hopelessness is back in his life. Anyhow, and so next part of the story, like I said, we'll trace these themes all the way through. The next part of the story is Joseph in prison, and then of course he meets the the Pharaoh's cupbearer, and starts to translate some people's dreams, just like he had. Well, we'll talk about his dreams that happened earlier in his life, just really briefly. But they'll talk about, or rather, I'll talk about how he interpreted these dreams, and he built his way up through the prison. Even in the midst of being in a crappy situation there, he still kind of made the best of it. And then so once again, going through those themes again, and identifying them, and then eventually him getting brought to Pharaoh's house. And specifically for the middle schoolers, we'll break then. So we'll make it all the way through that part of Joseph's story, which, excuse me, I told you I was going to give you scripture references and I didn't. So we'll make it about through Genesis 39:23, and then we're going to break off, and we're going to come back with an Aquila in the Bee video. If you haven't seen that movie, we're going to include the clip in the email that we're going to send out. But we'll break then, and you'll have the opportunity to talk about some stuff in your groups, and then we're going to come back to that video. And then we'll finish up after that. High school, we're just going to go through the story, and I will make sure that I have the story outlined for it so that you guys can kind of walk through it with your kids. Anyhow, and so coming back from middle school, this will just be the tail end for high school, will be that Joseph eventually becomes the chief minister in Egypt. He ends up becoming the number 2 after everything was said and done, and then his family reunion, and just once again walking through the themes. But the key verses for us are going to be in the story are Genesis 39:2 and 39:21, and basically that both say, and I'll include these in there, I don't think we'll put both of them on the screen, but that the Lord was with Joseph, period, through all of it. Even in the crummiest situations, God was there. And the second part was, you intended to harm me. And this is from, Genesis 50:20. This is when he's reunited with his family. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And so, and of course that's because, and we'll talk about this on Monday, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to get through it really quickly, but of course he saved lots of lives because he interpreted the Pharaoh's dreams, and then told basically Pharaoh what he needed to do to save many, many lives. And so, and then we'll look and say, even in the midst of crumminess, God's still in control. So even terrible things that happened in Joseph's life, God was still there. Things that other people meant to harm him, God was there and meant for good. And so, it's, even in the midst of terrible things, God had awesome plans for Joseph. And so that's basically what we're going to be talking about on Monday. And so I know it's not epic fail in the sense that Joseph failed. I think it's a great example of times where God uses really crummy situations, and how Joseph was able to get up over and over and over again with God's help because he had a relationship with God. Even in the midst of really terrible situations. So I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact us. And let me just walk you through, because I know I left, if you want to read ahead. The first part of the story, just Joseph's early life, basically, is Genesis 37:1-8. And then Joseph in Potiphar's house, the very beginning of it, where he's doing well, is 39:2-4. The temptation of Joseph in Potiphar's house is Genesis 39:6, like the second half of 6, through, I guess about, looks like 12. And let's see, Joseph in prison is 39:20-23. And then when we walk back and Joseph becomes the governor of Egypt, let's see, he's reunited in his family in 45:1-15. And about through 50 is when the last verse comes about, where our last of our key verses, where what Joseph's brothers had intended for bad, God had intended basically for greatness. And so that's a walkthrough of the verses. I'll make sure to include them in the email, so if you guys want to look those up. And hope that's helpful. Sorry the video is so long, a lot of information. I promise the story won't be really long when we tell it. It'll flow a little bit better. So thanks for your time, and hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks.